Hello, and thank you for joining today's webcast, the Quack Chat called Power Up Your Productivity with ERStudio 18.0. Today, our speaker is Ron Huizenga, the Senior Product Manager for Enterprise Architecture and Modeling at IDERA, and he is going to share with you all the features in the new release. And with that, Ron, over to you.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. We're very pleased to bring this release to market and got some exciting things in it that I know a number of our customers have been waiting for and wanting in the product. So without further ado, we'll launch into it and we'll begin talking about it. Basically, what I'm going to talk about first is just a little bit of a background in terms of ERStudio and the overall suite, the ERStudio Enterprise Team Edition, and our perspective in terms of how that actually enables your organization with enterprise architecture initiatives and data governance initiatives. I'll give an overview of, at high level, of the ERStudio 18.0 changes. And in particular, I'll be talking about Team Server with install and configuration changes made there, and the major overhaul that we've done to the publishing capabilities in Team Server as well. With any release, we always have updates to our MetaWizard bridges in the product, so we'll talk about that briefly. And then we'll go into things like technical considerations, the release schedule, and those types of things as well. Generally speaking, when people talk about enterprise architecture, you often hear the phrase, the 4 pillars of architecture. Our viewpoint is somewhat different on that. We view data architecture as the necessary foundation that needs to be there to enable all the other aspects of enterprise architecture. It's upon that solid data architecture foundation that you support the central pillar of business architecture, and then flanked by the other pillars of application architecture and technical architecture. And that balanced approach really enables your enterprise to move forward, and that entire structure supports initiatives such as data governance, process governance, and those types of things to align with your business strategies. Just a high-level overview of the ERStudio Enterprise Team Edition, just to give an overall viewpoint of how the suite fits together to fit that picture that we just talked about on the previous screen. I'm going to start in the bottom left of the screen, actually, and talk about the Business Architect tool, which is typically where business analysts, business architects, and those types of stakeholders do a lot of their work. In particular, working on figuring out business processes, modeling business processes, because the Business Architect tool supports full BPMN2 process modeling, but it also has very good integration with the data architecture as well. As those stakeholders are going through and working on business processes, talking with business users, they'll also be capturing data requirements that they can start to put into conceptual data models. Those can then be pushed into the Data Architect tool where further elaboration can be done. So obviously, logical models will derive from the conceptual models, but then of course, ultimately we want to get through to the point where we're actually doing physical data models for implementation. And that includes dimensional models, both at the logical and physical levels as well. And also the ability to do things like visually map and model data lineage and data flow modeling, such as the sources, the targets, and the transformations in between them as well. In conjunction with that, we have a lot of physical databases that we support in the product, and also NoSQL data stores. But accompanying that is the MetaWizard, in which we can bring in metadata from a variety of different modeling platforms, data platforms, both SQL and NoSQL platforms included in that. And on the Enterprise Team Edition, we can actually interrogate ETL platforms such as SSIS, Informatica, Talent, and those types of things to bring in the specifications to create visual data lineage diagrams, complete with the transformations right in the product just by interrogating those. Very importantly is all those data objects that we create are available for reference back into our process models. So when people are actually modeling out the business processes, they'll start at a fairly high level and drill down to lower and lower level of details as you're elaborating on that business process. At those lower levels, you will probably want to reference in the specific data stores, and our product allows you to do that by actually linking in the actual data store and specifying as detailed create, read, update, and delete operations on there as well. So you can get a very detailed picture of how you're interacting with the data, and that really ties together that foundation of the data architecture and that central pillar of the business architecture, because it's not only describing the data utilized in your organization, but the processes in the context of exactly how that data is used in your organization as well. Rounding it out from a modeling perspective is the software architect, which actually enables UML modeling. So A lot of customers like to supplement, especially for the application and technical architectures, doing things like sequence diagrams, component diagrams, and those types of things, really highlighting how the actual capabilities are delivered through application components to utilize in your organization as a whole. And then, of course, the very important piece to really drive business collaboration and governance, and that's the repository and team server aspect. All the data models and all the business architect workspaces can be checked into the repository, shared, they can be checked out, modified, checked back in, and published through the team server. So that not only the metadata is available, but very importantly, the visual diagrams are also available for other stakeholders to consume in team server. It's then augmented with business glossaries and the terms in those business glossaries, and those can then be associated to the relevant objects of both the data models and the process models. And when we talk about business glossaries, we're not just talking about words and their definitions for business terms. That's one aspect of it, but the structure is very flexible. So things like governance policies and even links out to reference and master data sources can be incorporated as hyperlinks, so you can have a complete picture of what's happening in your organization with the data and the processes that act upon that data as well. So now on to ERStudio 18.0. The major focus of this release is really on the Enterprise Team Edition and Team Server in particular. There are some things that we've been wanting to do for a while, and this is the release that we've finally been able to do it. First of all is a major overhaul on the installation and configuration on Team Server, and that includes the repository because they share a common installer. So if you're on Professional Edition using just the repository, you'll still benefit from these changes. And if you're on the full Enterprise Team Edition, you'll benefit from not only the repository installation changes, but the other parts of that are associated to the Team Server as well. In terms of publishing, the normal workflow right now in previous versions is you would work on a data model or a business architect workspace, you would check it into the repository, and then what had to happen is somebody had to go into Team Server, into the admin menu, if they had admin privileges, and then actually release that and publish that to make it available to other stakeholders. We'll talk about this in more detail, but we've reworked the entire workflow. So with preferences and other things that can be set that we're going to talk about, you can actually have it flow through right from check-in without even having to go into that console. But we've also reworked the publishing console to make it a lot more functional and a lot more useful for organizations as a whole. We also did 15 significant bug fixes and minor enhancements to go along with these features. And we also have hosting platform changes that we'll talk about in terms of where you can install and configure Team Server in the repository. On the Data Architect product, the changes are really tied into the publishing changes that we're making in Team Server as well. What you'll be able to do now is override and flow through publishing right from repository check-in, which you could not do before. Also, Data Architect is now available in 64-bit only. Microsoft has discontinued support of their older 32-bit versions of Windows, and most customers now should be on Windows 8.1 or later, all of which are 64-bit operating system platforms, because all of the other ones have been discontinued support for Microsoft as well. And also some minor bug fixes in Data Architect as well. And then Business Architect, kind of completing that picture. Same type of thing there. We've made changes there so you can actually do overrides for whether or not you want to publish your Business Architect workspace right at the point of repository check-in, which can alleviate the need to go to that publishing console if you don't want to. Let's talk about the install and configure in just a little more detail right now. This is a high-level mind map which really kind of outlines the nature of the changes that we've made. First and foremost, up on the left-hand side, is we really wanted to make sure that we streamlined and made the upgrade process much more robust. And some objectives that we wanted there are minimize the diagram version upgrades that are required when you do that, which happens when the file version changes within the internal models, and also minimizing the requirement to republish the models, because that can be very time consuming. The process in the previous releases to this was as follows. To install a new version of ERStudio Team Server and Repository, you would first have to uninstall the old version, then install the new version, walk through all the configuration options again, specifying them again. Then if there were file format changes, you had to run the full diagram version upgrade, and then you had to republish all of your models and workspaces to make them available again, which could be a very time-consuming process. If we go and look in the top hand right, we have a couple of things that are a couple of bullet points, but they're very significant. Number one is install over previous versions. So if you are on ERStudio team server and repository of 16.1 or later, you will simply install over top. You will not remove the previous version. And that's very critical, is do not remove that previous version, because the installer will detect the configuration settings and it will retain them. And more importantly, by doing that, what will happen is once you have those settings, you'll go through the installation or the configuration wizard again, just confirming your settings and making changes, that you may want to make to your particular environment on the way through. And once you've done that, and it's to actually run the actual configuration process, you resume your normal workflow. There is no longer a requirement to republish all of those models and workspaces. And in extremely large installations, that can actually take out weeks of processing that our very large customers have had to go through, because they had so many models and so many submodels that they were publishing and making available to their end users. So that's a major change that we've put in. What we've also done, and if any of you had actually downloaded the 17.11 patch and installed it, you would have seen some of this already, is right on the configuration screens, there's more descriptive text to give a little bit more guidance on the screens. I would definitely encourage you, whenever you're doing an upgrade, to go and look at the documentation that's on our documentation wiki, because there is an install and upgrade guide there, but we've also augmented that with more descriptive text on the screens themselves. Other things, there were certain situations where sometimes the previous profile that was used to connect to the database for some reason had been locked by a DBA. So the configurator has been updated to ensure that it's double checking to make sure that it's not a locked profile that's being used. And also better repository connection verification. And I'll show you a couple of screenshots about that in a minute. What it really means is that the credentials are fully verified before you can even step to the next page of the configurator, rather than finding out that you might have had a mistake a couple of screens down the line when you're actually trying to execute the configuration itself. EDM is, of course, where the registration occurs. It was the Embarcadero Development Network, where your profiles are stored and that type of thing. So we have a couple of things that we fixed there. And again, this applies to the Professional Edition as well as the Enterprise Team Edition. Professional Edition consists obviously of just Data Architect and the repository only. There were a couple of things that we had in there where the initial configuration and updating configuration had a couple of inconsistencies. Those have all been fixed. And also, of course, making sure that you're fully locked out and not having to go into some of the things that were needed in Enterprise Team Edition, so that you can have a much cleaner and quicker install of the Professional Edition as well. On top of that, there were a number of bug fixes that were in the release, and all of these are in the release notes that are up on the documentation wiki as well. So let's look at the better database connection verification. What you'll also see here is, at a first glance, for those of you that have been using the product, is you'll see that the style sheet has also changed. We had that kind of a black banner behind the IDERA logo before, and basically the background was kind of a grayish brown color, which really didn't render very well on certain monitors, and it made things a little bit difficult to read at times. So basically it's cleaned up right now. You're actually seeing it shaded right now because I have a pop-up dialog, but that actually is a white background around the dialog boxes, which you'll see in other screens coming forward. On this particular screen, this is my repository database setup screen, and I've put in my database credentials here, and I've clicked the test button, and that's come up with the dialog that says the test connection is successful. You need to get that connection successful before the next button will actually light up and let you go to the next screen on the configuration, just ensuring that you do have the correct credentials there. Exactly the same thing happens when you're walking through and doing the service account verification, because Team Server and repository do use a service account to run some of the Windows services that run in the background. And as well on the Team Server, it's actually using Windows Server desktop resources to help render those diagrams that are being published out into Team Server as well. Same thing there, clicking the test button gives the dialog. Once you've passed that verification, that's when the next button is available, and then you can go into the remaining screens of the configurator itself. In terms of platform changes, we have made changes to the database platforms for hosting of repository and Team Server. The SQL Server 2008 versions are no longer supported. They're out of mainstream support from Microsoft and rolling off of extended support. So to install and configure SQL Server 2012 through 2017 are required. Later in the year, we'll also be supporting SQL Server 2019 in a later release. In Oracle, we've also added support to host on Oracle 12c R2. If you are an Oracle customer, you're probably well aware that 12c R2 actually deprecated a number of features under the covers, so we had to fully certify and make sure that we were not utilizing any of those features and that everything in Team Server and repository was compatible with that. That certification has been done, so that is now available. And that makes the range of platforms, if you're hosting Oracle, be anything from 11G through 12C R2. DB2 has been a hosting platform for the repository and Team Server for quite some time. We're actually removing support for DB2 in this version, and we actually announced that in the previous versions that would be occurring. And the reason is almost all of our customers had already moved off of DB2 as a hosting platform onto SQL Server and Oracle. There are two other ones that I'm aware of, and they'd already begun the process of migrating off of that. And that's very good news in terms of it allows us to standardize on the two major platforms for hosting, which means that we can actually focus our development resources in other areas of the product to keep moving those forward even faster and higher quality as well. As you can imagine, for every platform that's supported for the full range of Team Server and repository capability, that's a lot of testing and regression testing that has to be done in every release. So streamlining this benefits everybody. In terms of operating systems, the same thing is the Windows Server 2008 versions are off of Microsoft mainstream support as well. So to install and configure, it is a server-based installation for the repository and Team Server. So you require Windows Server 2012 through 2016 to be able to do that. Again, with Windows Server 2019, that will be supported coming up in a later release as well. Let's talk about the publishing, because this is where a wide variety and a large number of the changes have actually been made to the product. I'm going to very quickly describe the publishing flow, and I've talked about it a little bit already. And again, this is a mind map that kind of highlights it. But when we talk about the business architect and the data architect, when you're working on your models and workspaces, the old process was as follows. You would basically create a model or workspace. The first time you would actually add it or add the diagram or workspace to the repository, you would check it in. Then you would go into the Team Server admin menu where you found the publishing console, and somebody with the admin privileges had to go through and release and publish that diagram to make it available to the other users. When you made subsequent changes, what would happen is if you checked it in again, it would say, oh, this has already been published previously, so it would just automatically flow through and it would republish and auto-publish that again within the Team Server. If you wanted to stop that auto-publish from happening, there was a way to do it that was kind of a hack in the background to be able to stop that, because customers did want to be able to stop that and have full control over whether the thing's published or not. We've made significant changes in this release to ensure that you're in control of the workflow to make it work how you want it to work on the entire publishing workflow. So what happens now is, I'm actually going to go bottom right for a second here. We have global preferences that we've set up that are in the admin menu, and that says several things, and I'll go through that screen in a moment, but it gives you the ability to say whether or not you want to be able to schedule publications. It also lets you configure whether or not you want auto-publish to be allowed, and if so, whether you want to be able to override the default value for auto-publish on repository check-in from both Data Architect and Business Architect. So the changes to both those products are changes to those check-in screens that allow you to have that override prompt where necessary. The old publishing console also, and for lack of better terms, was not the most intuitive, and it actually confused some users as well. So what we've actually done is we've redesigned the entire UI, which I'll show you in a moment, to make it a lot more functional. It now has search parameters, it has sortable columns, a much better status reporting and icons and color usage throughout the display. It also has the ability to basically track the history of publishing on any of the given models as well. So now you have that full history of what happened, when, and who did it in terms of the publishing of the models. And that includes things like the actual diagram release version information, drill down to that history, and the start and end times for the publications as well. So it gives you a build-up of history of how long it's taking you to publish those specific diagrams as well. In terms of productivity improvements, again, I've talked about the fact that we can actually schedule, auto-publish, and allow overrides. And now all the publishing is also done by batch. So let's take a look at what that screen looks like. First of all, here's the new publishing preferences screen that is under the admin menu. So the first option there is, do you allow publication scheduling? If yes, you'll have an ability and buttons will be enabled on the UI to allow you to schedule a publication rather than just have it take off immediately when you publish it. If no, those buttons will be grayed out. In terms of auto publishing options, what's the default value for auto publishing? If you want it turned on as yes as a default value or no, you can set it here. We also, to be consistent, sometimes people want to make sure that on an initial publish that they don't want to auto-publish. Maybe there's somebody who actually has authority that wants to review it first before it becomes published. That's different from the person checking it in. So then you would actually set this to a no value, and then that person would go and review it, and then they would go into the publication menu and kick off the publication once they finish their review. The other thing, though, is if you want to allow overrides of the default value at check-in, and this is going to control the behavior of the check-in dialogues and, of course, the add diagram or workspace dialog boxes as well. The way that's going to work is, here's a couple of examples, and I'll actually show you the process itself in just a moment. But here's the add diagram on Data Architect on the left-hand side of the screen. And if you look at the bottom left, you'll actually see this new checkbox that says Auto Publish Diagram. If your default is yes, the check mark will default there. If your default is no, it will be blank. If you have the ability to override, you'll be able to toggle that value at check-in or add diagram time. The same thing on the Business Architect. It looks a little bit different because the dialogue's slightly different on the Business Architect, but the same behavior with the auto publish box with the checkbox that initializes based on the value that you specified on that previous screen. So what does this look like? Here's an example of a model that I'm working with right now. So what I want to do is I want to add this one to the repository. So what I'm doing is I'm going up, I'm clicking my add diagram, confirming my dialogues. I've left all the dialogues on here. My add diagram comes up. I'm going to choose a repository project that I want to put this into. That's selected. And if I look down below, I see I've defaulted on and I click OK. So what's happening now is obviously it's going through the steps to verify the diagram, and it's now checking it into the repository, and it's available for use. It's just finishing up this process very quickly. And that was pretty much it. The last thing that remains, of course, is the refresh of icons that would happen, which has happened now. Now let's look at it a slightly different way. This is one where I'm actually going to override that auto-published value. So if I do this one, it looks very similar. Same type of thing, I'm adding the diagram, and of course I'm doing this from the toolbar, but I could also do it from the repository menu or from the model tree. There are several ways I can do it. The dialog comes up, same thing. I'm going to pick my repository project. Here's the auto-publish. I'm turning it off for this one. So what that means is it's still going to do the same process, but it's not going to automatically flow through and publish in Team Server. To make it publish, I would actually go to the publishing console and I would select it there and then allow it to publish through at that point in time. It looks slightly different on a change, so let's take a quick look at that. So here's yet another diagram that I previously checked in, and I've actually got this in a checked out state right now. And on this particular example, I just want to make a change to some of my diagram properties here and then check in the changes, just to show you that the dialog looks a little different. So through the magic of typing, there we go. We've put in a new diagram description. And now I'm actually going to use a slightly different way. I'm going to do it right off the tree, check in the diagram itself, click my confirmations. And in this one, I'm actually going to take advantage of our change management capabilities as well. So I'm putting in a change record, and I'm going to reference it to a task that I have set up in Team Server as well, because I can have an audit trail of the tasks to Team Server. I've selected my task. I now confirm. And of course, my auto publish, as you see, is actually there, and it's checked on the bottom left. I'm typing in a bit of a description to go along with this as well. And then we just click OK, and it flows right through. And there we go. Same thing on the Business Architect, slightly different dialogue. So I'll show you just one example of this. Here's an example of one of the BPMN2 choreography types of diagrams that are in the Business Architect. Same process here. I check in. I'm going up to the toolbar to do my add workspace. Again, I could do it from the menu as well. I'm putting in a comment in terms of my initial check-in here. And as you see down below, the auto-publish value is checked. I'm just going to leave that, and it's going to flow through. And it's now checked into the repository, and it's kicked off and publishing in Team Server as well. Let's look at the old screen. So this is the old publishing console screen that that's been removed from the product. We do have some similarity in what we've implemented. We still retain the project structure from the repository and nest the diagrams underneath that in the default view of the screen itself. But this screen, as it was a little bit cumbersome and difficult to use. For example, and this, what I've got highlighted here is there are diagrams here where I've clicked the remove action as an example, but when I go up top, it's not really intuitive. It's like, well, I don't see a remove button to trigger this publication. What you had to do was still click that publish selected hyperlink, knowing that that was the command that actually invoked any action on this particular screen. So this has been fully redesigned as well. And of course, you still see the dates and times, and just the look and feel of the screen was not really functional in the product. So this is where we did a major overhaul to it. This is an example of the publishing console. As you can see, much cleaner, much neater, and much more intuitive in terms of the way that the entire publishing console works. We'll go through a few of these things in following screens, but you'll notice a few things right off the bat. Number one is the published models is up on the main menu. So you see that with the tab highlighted at the top. Not only that, but also there's a quick search capability. So if you're looking for a diagram and you know the name of it, you can just do things like type in the first few characters of the name and it will subset the list. I'll show you that in a moment. You have the ability to create filters, and we can create very complex filters. I'll walk through an example of one of those in a moment. And then very intuitive with the buttons of the action that you really want to do. Are you publishing? Are you unpublishing? If you have scheduling preferences turned on, then you also have the schedule and unschedule buttons available to you, so you can click those. Next to that, on the far right, it looks like a download tray, and that's exactly what it is. It's to download the logs. So should you have an instance where a problem does arise, it used to be a bit cumbersome to go out, gather the correct logs, and send them to our support team for analysis. Now you can go to that tray, and it will gather and select all the logs, put them in a zip file for you, and then you can submit that so that people can review the logs and try to isolate what the problem was if one does occur. And of course, on the farthest right, the refresh button icon is a lot more intuitive as well. When you look at the workspace itself, still a checkbox to select things. If you check on a folder, it will select everything in the folder. If you have nested folders in your repository, that nested structure will still exist in this view. Diagrams and workspaces are shown with the names. This is a new column to the right of that, which is version. And this is based on the internal file format of the data model itself. We actually haven't had an internal file format change on the diagrams since 16.5, which means that 16.5 to 18.0 is the same file format version, which is important because what that also means to you is that you don't have to do a diagram version upgrade if you're within any of those versions when you're installing this over top as well. The status, much more intuitive. The published ones are in green to highlight anything that's in progress. It has more detailed messaging for the different steps that it's going through now in the publishing cycle, and those are in the blue color. And should an error occur, it would actually appear in red. We also now publish by batch numbers. So whether you flow through an auto-publish or not, or you select off of the screen, the groups of models that you select will be part of a batch. And that's very important. It gives you a good audit trail as well. And then we track that by batch within the product now. And also, when things have been published, the last publication information is here, which shows you the date and time and who actually did it. In this particular example, it was just me as an admin doing it the first time through, but in a couple of the other examples, you'll see more users represented on the screen as well. We also retain that for the last one, of course, did you actually auto-publish it through check-in or not? So that value is retained on the screen. And we'll talk about that action button on the right. That's how you're actually going to drill down. It looks like a clock because it's a historical perspective. That's how we will drill down and look at the actual publish history for a given diagram or workspace in the tool as well. So it's more fun when you actually see it working. So let's look at the on-demand publishing. What we do here is I'm just going to select a folder, a couple of models there, another model here or workspace, and then I'm going to click the publish button. As you can see, it's turned around right away. I'm already seeing a status of the things that are happening in terms of those particular models I selected, and they are progressing. If I wanted to see a change in the status, I could click the refresh button and that type of thing. If I'm scheduling, slightly different process here. The nice thing about the scheduling is you have a calendar control and you also have a date time control. So you can pick the date and then pick the time that you want to have something scheduled. And then you save it, it actually shows up on the screen. So let's do this now. So we pick one here. What's happening is I'm picking this particular model, the e-commerce and the Northwind models. I'm now going to schedule them. The picker comes up. This one I'm going to leave the date okay, but it is a calendar control. I can up and down arrow on each section of the time and click save. And as soon as I've done that, I see the scheduled date and times appearing against those models on there as well. There may be instances where you don't want to or where you want to unpublish the models. And if that's the case and you select them and you click the unpublish button, you will get a confirmation dialog just to ensure that you're not doing that by accident and unpublishing by accident. So again, you would confirm yes if you really want to unpublish models when you select them, and you would click no in the instance that you really didn't want to. Let's talk about some of the functionality on the screen itself now. All of the columns on this particular UI are also sortable now to really help you find things that you're looking for and sorting on any of the columns that are available on the screen itself. So if I do that, say batch number, if I want to sort by batch number, it's taken that and collapsed them, and I can do ascending or descending order. Same with the date and time or any of the other columns along the way. And as you'll notice, when I've done that, it's actually collapsed and gotten rid of the folder structure. So I'm seeing the list of models and workspaces combined together, all sorted by the contents of that particular field. So it can make it very easy to sort and find what you're looking for. I just cleared the clear button or click the clear button, and that resets it to the default format with the folder structure and everything there. So that is very easy to utilize as well. Publish history and audit trail, when I drill into it, I can actually see all the different things that have gone on, basically from the newest first on the top of the list, along with batch numbers, file versions, and it even shows schedule and unscheduled activities and those types of things in the publish history and audit trail. The way that I invoke that is I just click through, I go up to the history icon there in the action column, and that's what brings up my particular screen as well. Let's now talk about quick search. And this is the case where maybe you know the name of a particular model, so you just want to start typing in the quick search field. And what it's going to do is it's going to subset the list of everything that's shown in the screen as well. So let's say I put in the letter O. As soon as I do that, I've got a couple of models that start with O. OR is the same, and as soon as I start typing more characters, it's filtering on the fly as I'm going through and typing in more characters to really allow me to hone in on the particular model that I may be looking for. However, in a lot of instances, you're looking for more complex criteria. So what we do there is we actually have search filters set up, and the way we've designed this is when you look at the actual criteria, the first thing you have is a combo box that shows you which column is it that you want to sort on. And it's shown in the exact order that the columns appear on the screen as well, from left to right. You can choose those values and then you can build it up. You have the logical operators and then you can select the values. It also knows, of course, there are certain instances where information might be in specific tokens, for instance, lists of users and that type of thing. So you'll be able to pick and choose specific users in this particular example. Or if it's something like a name that you've chosen, then it will be doing matching based on the text or portion of text that you provide in the filter. You have logical operators that you can put together with and or capabilities to actually start linking different types of criteria together to build a very complex search criteria if you wish. And then when you save and filter, it actually saves it. It's user specific, so it's in your environment. So you come in and it's saved under your settings that you can use. And then, of course, it renders the search based on the values that you've put in. To give you an example of this, I'm going through, clicking the filter dialog, adding a new filter. I want to find out what Mickey did this week. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. First, I'm going to say Mickey's the one who published it. Drop down list, picking him from the list. I'm also going to join it. because I want to add some date criteria on this particular one. I'm picking my date time after a certain date. This is the same type of calendar control that you would have seen before, and also the same type of time in terms of being able to specify the values with the different sections with up and down arrows if you wish. Save and filter, and now it actually shows me everything that happened. You also see that the filter has lit up there, and if you mouse over it, it will give you the full name of the filter, because sometimes those titles can be longer than fit in that allowable space. So it's a good way of doing that without actually moving things around on the button bar on the screen as well. So very intuitive, very easy to use to filter things out. Auto log gathering is also something that's very important should you run into an issue. And this is just a screen grab here that basically shows you, if you click that download tray, there's a couple of different log types that you can detail just the sync log if you want to, but all the detailed logs are available just by clicking that download detailed logs. It will create a zip file, prompt you where to save it, and then you can actually utilize that to submit if you have a problem as well. So those logs can be reviewed to isolate the issue. Let's talk about the import bridges. This is very significant. The MetaWizard bridges are bridges that we've included in Enterprise Team Edition for many, many years now. And there are subsets of the bridges available in the other editions of the product as well. What's very important, of course, is many organizations, and probably everybody on this call, are starting to utilize more and more data platforms all the time. We keep expanding in our capabilities for our native forward and reverse engineering in the tool itself as well, but we also supplement that with the ability to import the metadata from a lot of these other data sources. In this release, there are 19 new MetaWizard bridges that have come in, and some of them, I know some of you are utilizing some of these platforms already. We've heard requests for SAP HANA, which is actually on our roadmap for native support coming up later as well. Snowflake is one that more organizations are starting to use, so that's been added as a JDBC bridge in this particular release as well. And more people are starting to look with, well, how do we deal with things like ontologies, or if you've heard of RDF import and that sort of thing from a different type of modeling paradigm, as it were. So there's a new bridge in the product for that as well as a number of these other bridges. And this list is continually growing. If you look at the number of bridges in the product right now, in Enterprise Team Edition, we have 162 metadata import bridges, 59 metadata export bridges to push out to other platforms and tools and that type of thing, and 28 data lineage imports on the Enterprise Team Edition, which is what I referred to earlier in terms of being able to interrogate ETL sources, bring that in, create models, and also the visual data lineage diagrams depicting the sources, the targets, and the transformations between them as well. This list is continually growing and continually being enhanced as we keep moving forward with the product. In terms of technical considerations for the 18.0 release, it is a new major version of the release. When we do a major version, it really means we've got new capabilities that we've built into the product, or we've had a file format change internally as well. In this particular instance, we haven't had a change to the internal file format of the data architect files since the 16.5 release. So what that means as well, just as a reminder, is if you're upgrading from 16.5 through 17.1 to 18.0, you do not need to run a diagram version upgrade in the data architect tool to update those repository diagrams. If you're updating from version 16.1x versions or earlier, then you do have to do a diagram version upgrade. But either way, you don't have to republish. All client applications on a major release, of course, have to be at the same version, so they all have to be at the 18.0 version to match the repository and team server configuration, because you won't be able to connect, for instance, from a 17.x version to an 18.0 repository or vice versa. There is a check to ensure that you are utilizing the same numbered version to be able to do that. Under the covers, other upgrades that we haven't talked about yet is Team Server has an application server built in, which is Tomcat. So we've updated the Tomcat application server in this release to 9.0.12. And we've also updated Java to version 8.181 under the covers. All products in the suite are updated with the 18.0 version, and that includes the Software Architect and our standalone viewer product, if anyone's using those. And again, a reminder that Data Architect is now 64-bit only. The 32-bit version has been discontinued. A reason for that, and you're actually going to see that coming out a little bit later this year, is in parallel with this release, we've been doing a lot of work on the data architect that's going to be released in the near future, where we fully updated the Visual Studio framework and components underneath data architect, and that's going to allow us to upgrade and put in a new parser architecture that we've been working on, which is going to allow us to roll out more and more platform updates and add new platforms much more easily in the future as well. So those are a couple of things that you'll be able to see in the future this year in terms of rolling out new capabilities in the product suite. We continually invest in the product, not only new features, but enhancements, and also making sure that we're upgrading the technology underneath the product on a continuous basis as well. In terms of ERStudio editions, still available in the 3 basic editions: standalone data architect, and of course the data architect professional suite, which is a combination of the data architect tool combined with the repository. Users on professional edition definitely benefit significantly from the install configure enhancements that we've announced here today. And then of course ERStudio Enterprise Team Edition, which includes obviously not only the repository, but the team server aspects of it, being able to publish the models, build the business glossaries, and those other capabilities. And obviously all of the publishing enhancements are a major step up to the Enterprise Team Edition suite with this release as well. So we're very happy to be able to bring this to you. I just want to recap as well in terms of our approach and going back to some of that previous overview that I gave of the product as well. One of the key points about ERStudio Enterprise Team Edition is really the value that it provides by delivering not only the metadata when publishing the information, but also making the diagrams and that visual context of what's happening available to all the stakeholders when we publish this out into Team Server. Other solutions that consist of just a metadata repository only may do something like a metadata import. There may be a metadata catalog that doesn't have any corresponding visual models to clarify it. And typically you're finding that metadata through matching or text search and lookup. I call this the Flat Earth Society because what it's really doing is it's giving you a very flat picture of what's really occurring with your data in the organization. And it doesn't provide you the full context of not only what the data is, but how it's being utilized in the organization. And it's also very difficult to determine how all that information is related without the benefit of the visual diagrams to give you that perspective. In ERStudio, we have the fully integrated metadata and visual models in the repository, in the metadata repository. That means the data models, the business process models, the visual data lineage diagrams, all of those are there published, as well as the corresponding metadata. And when you combine that with the business glossaries where you're doing terms and definitions, policies, and reference data links and that type of thing, it gives you the very full perspective of not only how that data is being used, but where you can find that data and the policies that govern that data in your organization as well, giving you that complete picture for initiatives like data governance. When we look at the suite as a whole, of course, at the core of this, when we're talking about the data and the modeling, we have all of these different model types that we publish out, and that is the conceptual data models, both the logical and physical data models. Dimensional models are a special type of the model that we actually have. And if you haven't used it, I'd encourage you to do that in the data modeling, because when you're doing the dimensional modeling, you get different characteristics as well. And we actually have capabilities built into the tool so that whether you're reverse engineering or if you're building a dimensional model from scratch, we can automatically detect the types of tables that they are, whether they're facts, dimensions, and also the classifications of those tables as well, to really help you to build out very rich models. The visual data lineage, of course, being able to depict sources, targets, and the transformations that occur. You can also model very complex data flow within those visual data lineage diagrams. And very importantly is the capability with our repository of having the enterprise data dictionaries, which means you can have characteristics or attachments that you can share across all of your models. You can define governance policies there as well, with basically alerts when you're publishing the information into Team Server to let you know that you have sensitive information, really completing a very tight picture of how that information is related. And what you can also do with those enterprise data dictionaries is it allows you to do links across your models so that you can link like concepts from something like an enterprise model to the implementation models across all your different databases that represent that same concept. That's supplemented with, of course, everything that we find in the team server collaboration platform. So the business glossaries are there, the business concepts from Business Architect get published out there, policies, reference data sets can be referenced in, security, alerts and notifications, and also we can define data sources that are associated to models and that type of thing as well. And from the business architecture perspective, again, from the business architect, we can enumerate goals and strategies which are published out and they can be linked in, business rules, business units that are used not only in the business process diagrams themselves, but also made available in the team server. We also have an application object that we've got in the business process models in the business architect tool. So that allows us to create associations between the applications that deliver the processes or the functionality that you're depicting in your models as well. And of course, from a governance perspective, stewards that are responsible for the different areas, the ability to follow the different artifacts and even different users in the product with a social paradigm, and being alerted to changes in your streams. If a model that you're interested in changes, you'll see that in your stream. And then of course, being able to initiate and follow discussion threads about any of these types of objects that occur through the entire platform. So it really is a full metadata governance and collaboration platform that is offered through the Enterprise Team Edition. In this particular release, just to summarize, the team server and repository installation and configuration changes were a major uplift in this particular release. The ability to install over previous versions really streamlines things and eliminates that publishing step. We retain the configuration settings. And like I said, in very large environments, this can potentially save weeks of time compared to the previous versions because you don't have to go through and republish all of those models. In very large installations, we have some customers that have hundreds or even a couple thousand models. So you can imagine that that can be very time consuming going through that process. So that has now been eliminated, and it's going to streamline your upgrade processes going forward as well, which is good news because that means you'll be able to adapt to our new releases more quickly to take advantage of new features as well. In terms of hosting, DB2 no longer supported as a hosting platform for the repository and team server. Oracle 12 CR2 has been added. And from operating system perspective, Windows Server 2012 to 2016 are needed for the team server and repository because the Windows Server 2008 releases are no longer supported because they are out of support from Microsoft as well. And then of course the publishing, where you saw a lot of the area focusing today with major UX improvements on team server. The style sheets and those types of things that you saw is going to continue to roll out through the rest of team server, as well as improving workflow and a lot of other things as we continue upgrading and enhancing team server as we move forward. The fully redesigned console, continually thinking about streamlining workflow based on feedback from our users and that type of thing. And of course, the history and audit trail of the publishing wasn't there before. So now you have that at your fingertips. And where situations do occur, the automated log gathering for support situations as well makes that even easier. That's all I have in terms of the actual formal presentation today. So Joy, we'll see if we have any questions that have come in on the way through, and we will now address those.
Thank you, Ron. Great presentation. And yes, we do have a number of questions. For anyone else on the line who would like to ask a question, please submit that through the GoToWebinar interface. We'll be happy to take as many as we can in the time that we have left. If we're not able to get to your question, we will plan to follow up with you after the event. Thank you very much. Okay, so Ron, my first question for you is, can you provide more information on the ability to put policies and reference data sets in Team Server? Does this relate to the attachments in Data Architect, or is it something different?
There's actually a couple of different ways to do it. In Data Architect, you can use an attachment to define many types of things. So you could actually do things and publish and link them in the Data Architect and they have it flow through as attachments in Team Server as well. One approach that I really like to use, though, is I use my glossary structure in Team Server to enable these types of things. So what I do there is, in the glossaries, I always create a number of different glossaries. So for instance, my business terminology, which are really the terms and definitions, I'll set up in different glossaries based on different business areas. So I'll start with a top level glossary, then I'll break them up amongst business areas and have those terms that relate to those business areas in those child glossaries, as it were, and those all roll up to the parent glossary as well. I'll do the same thing, whereas I'll set up a glossary and term types for things like governance policies. So at my top level, I have just a general governance glossary. And then based on the types of regulations that I'm subject to, I then like to have child glossaries. So for instance, if I'm subject to GDPR, I'd have a glossary for GDPR policies. I might have another one for HIPAA if I'm healthcare, PCI for payment card industry, if say I'm a retailer or something like that. And then I'll enumerate the policy statements within those individual glossaries. Once I have those there, I could then link them through to the actual components that have been published that they relate to. So I can link it back to the types of data that I've or the data stores that I've published into the models as well. The same thing occurs with reference data and master data. I'll set up a different type of glossary for that, enumerate those sources, again, probably broken down by business area, because generally speaking, you're going to find reference or master data in something like a master data hub, or basic. Sometimes, if it's reference data, your source might actually be a spreadsheet or other things like that. So what you can do in the glossaries is you can just create a hyperlink out to those sources, and then it's available for access through your business glossary structure just by clicking on that hyperlink within Team Server. So a lot of flexibility in terms of the ways that you can set it up.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Ron. Okay, another question is about the Publish Models menu. Is that still an admin-only function?
No, that has been moved up to the main menu. It's still secureable like the other menu options now, but that was one of the major drawbacks of the previous approach is when you checked in a model, if you didn't have a midden capability, you had to ask somebody else to go in that had that capability to publish that model. That's now been alleviated a couple of different ways. One, it's now on the main menu, so it's more open to other users, but it is still secureable. So your security administrator for Team Server would still grant access to that capability. However, if you're not able to publish, you still have the ability to view it. So at least you can see the models and the history out there of what has been published as well. The other part of that, though, is that auto-publish. If you have the defaults turned on to auto-publish, you don't even need to go to that menu anymore, because what you can do is it will flow through automatically, or if your default value is no and you have override capability when checking into the repository, you just check it and it flows through, so you don't even have to go to the publish menu anymore in a lot of instances.
Excellent, great. We also had a couple of questions about the JIRA integration built into the tool. Have there been any changes made in this release, or are there some coming up?
Not in this particular release, but the way the JIRA integration works is you can associate a JIRA project with an ERStudio repository project. And when you do that, when you're doing your check-ins, just like I had that one task that came up on my list, the tasks from that associated JIRA project would come up. You could reference that and check in, and then of course it maintains it in the audit trail as well.
Okay, very good. You were talking about the new search capabilities within Team Server. Can you use wild characters in that search?
For the fields that actually are text-based rather than tokens, which for instance, fields like users are tokens because it actually grabs from the distinct list of users that are in there. So those you can't do a wildcard search. But for things like titles and that type of thing in that search dialog, you can use the wildcards. And because the operators have things like contains and everything as well. So there are a number of operators that are available too.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. Can you clarify the support for DB2? I believe that's not available as a Team Server repo host, but it is still available as a data architect platform.
Absolutely, and that's a very good distinction. The DB2 discontinuance is only for hosting of the repository in Team Server. We still remain committed to the forward and reverse engineering of the DB2 platform in Data Architect. Basically, we have DB2 LUW version as well as the DB2 mainframe, the ZOS version that we maintain support for on forward and reverse engineering, and of course the data modeling itself. We also are maintaining, of course, we also still have the DB2 iSeries. That is basically frozen at an older level because that platform is in decline, but those capabilities still work with the current versions of iSeries DB2 as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, quite a few questions here. I'm trying to sort through and figure out which ones to ask in the remaining time. Is there an automated way to harvest data models from specific schemas in a database instead of manually reverse engineering the data models?
What you could do is obviously the default way of doing it is connecting to the database, clicking the reverse engineer and that type of thing. You could build a macro by setting up like a list of data models that you wanted to reverse to, and then actually pull them in at a different time or something like that. It's a little bit more complex, but you do have the automation capabilities to do that.
Okay, very good. Can the import bridges, for example, Azure Data Warehouse, be used for reverse engineering purposes, or perhaps even as one of the sources in a data lineage diagram?
That's kind of a two-step question. Basically what happens, say you've got the data lineage bridge for Azure Data Warehouse, what that's going to do is it's going to connect through JDBC, and it's going to bring those data structures back into what we would call a generic data model diagram within the Data Architect product. Once you have that in there, you can actually build visual data lineage diagrams referencing that and other models as well. The thing about the visual data lineage as well is you can there's a couple of things there. You can have multiple models in the same DM1 or model file, so you could do it all within one model file if you wished. But even if you save those models separately, you have an ability to reference them in as other models and still incorporate them into visual data lineage diagrams. So you can link across models to do that.
Okay, very good. And can you explain a little more about how to publish only data governance, compliance, and binding attachments data, or if that's possible?
To publish only attachments in the data, when you publish, you're basically publishing the entire data model. So anything that you've put into that data model, which is the data structures, any changes that you've made there, any attachments or policy or security policies that you've put on there, all of that metadata in the visual diagrams publish out into Team Server itself. So there isn't a way to just publish, say, for instance, a subset of objects out of a particular data model. And the reason for that is the value of those models is really the context and relationships about all those constructs together. So separating that out, you would actually lose a lot of continuity by trying to do that.
All right, well, thank you, Ron. Excellent presentation, a lot of great interaction from the audience, and still a number of questions that we don't have time to get to right now, but we will follow up with you after this event. There are a lot of options here in terms of reaching out to us. If you have questions, you can always reach out to your sales representative. This presentation has been recorded, and we will be posting the replay of this event early next week, and we will be posting the slides at the link that I included in the chat box in the events folder on the community website. So if you go to community.idera.com, you can go to the events section, Quack Chat, you'll find the link for this event, and I will have the slides posted shortly after this event today. And then the replay, as I mentioned, will be available early next week. If there are any other comments you'd like to make in closing, Ron?
I would just like to thank everybody for taking some time out of their day to join us here today. We're very excited about not only this release, but a number of things that we're working on that you're going to see rolling out this year as well. And I just want to, again, reemphasize the point that we're continually investing in this product suite, not only in terms of features that you see, but also the infrastructure and the technology under the covers as well. And we've been around for over 23 years as a product, for those of you that don't know that, and we intend to be around a lot longer, delivering the capabilities that you need to manage your organization.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ron, and thank you to all who have attended. Everyone have a great day.